Good evening, everyone. So today's session is going to be about instrumental vaginal delivery. Can we start the screen sharing? Okay. So this is going to be a relatively short session. So if you have any doubts regarding the previous sessions, you can clear your doubts in this session because it's not going to be a demo. So the other terms used can be operative vaginal delivery other than instrumental vaginal delivery. Now, operative vaginal delivery includes any surgeries which are done to assist vaginal delivery. So it includes forceps application, vacuum application, and also surgeries to deliver the dead fetus. Do you know any surgeries which can be used to deliver the dead fetus? To reduce the size of the head, to reduce the size of the head and deliver the dead fetus. Are you familiar with any surgeries? So that also comes under the heading of operative vaginal delivery. Yes, craniotomy. So craniotomy, vacuum application, clidotomy. Do you know what is clidotomy? Forceps application all come under the broad heading of operative vaginal delivery. So use of vacuum and forceps is a further subheading of operative vaginal delivery. It is called instrumental vaginal delivery. Okay. Clidotomy is nothing but fracturing of the clavicle. Yes. Very nice. Yeah. So breaking of the clavicle to deliver the baby when there is a big baby, that's called clidotomy. So all that comes under operative vaginal delivery. Now, mainly what you have to see in this operative vaginal delivery, the forceps and the vacuum, the main difference is forceps causes majorly maternal complications. So injuries are more because as you can see, the size of the instrument is bigger, occupies more space in the pelvis. So perineal, third degree perineal tear, fourth degree perineal tear is more in forceps. And if you look at the vacuum, because of the vacuum created inside the cup, which is sucking on the scalp, various types of hemorrhages or fetal injuries are more common in vacuum delivery. Okay. Yeah. Next slide. So history of forceps. Forceps was invented by the Chamberlain family. There are Peter I, Peter II, and Peter III. So Peter I is supposed to have invented the forceps, and Peter II popularized the use of forceps, and they kept it as a family secret for more than a century, and they did not tell their findings to anyone. So whenever there was a difficult delivery, they had a locked chest in which they would carry their forceps, and then they would do the deliveries. And during the delivery, other than them, nobody would be allowed in the delivery suite, and they would also blindfold the delivering patient. So that is the level of secrecy which was involved in the use of forceps. But later on, the secret was leaked out, and following which there are 700 varieties of forceps which were invented. And there are a lot of Indians also who have been credited with the invention of forceps. Do you know the name of any forceps which is invented by Indian? Any obstetrician who is associated with the invention of forceps? So the low forceps which we are using, which we are rarely using now, it was invented by an Indian. Yes, Das forceps. So the Das forceps are the low variety of obstetric forceps that is introduced by Indians. Still, there are many more. V.P. Paili from Kerala has come out with his own variety of forceps. Now, there are 3 varieties of forceps which are commonly used in present day practice. Next slide, please. So the types of forceps are the long curved forceps. The long curved forceps, there are many names for that. The foreign counterpart is called as the Simpson's forceps, whereas the Indian one is called as the Das forceps. And it can have access traction devices which aid in further pulling of the forceps. The short curved forceps, which where the head is just at the perineum and you're putting an outlet forceps, we use a short curved forceps. And what is the name for the short curved forceps? Anybody? Forceps will be kept in the exams for you. And so you'll have to know the names. The outlet forceps, the short curved forceps is called as, and the Keeland forceps, yes, Wrigley. So you have to remember that the longer forceps, if they keep in the exam, that is the Das forceps, and the smaller one is the Wrigley's forceps. So these two names, there are many names for the forceps depending upon how are the shanks, whether they're overlapping, lapping, or what is the type of lock. But these two names for undergraduate level, you have to remember. For the long forceps, it is Das, and for the short forceps, it is Wrigley. And the rotational forceps, like from occipito transverse, when it is deep transverse arrest, I told you that deep transverse arrest, the only mechanism of labor is you try to do a cesarean section. Yeah, but you can try to rotate the head, and this requires a very great level of skill, and it is hardly practiced nowadays in India, at least, because there is more amount of injury, and the training is also not adequate. So that forceps, rotational forceps, which rotates the head in the pelvis and then delivers the head, is called Keylands forceps. Yes, next slide, please. Yeah, Keylands. So a forceps has basically two branches. Okay, what you can see is one branch here. So that branch has a blade. Just below the blade is the shank. Below that is the lock where the two branches meet. And then there is a handle with or without a screw. Okay. So depending upon the length of the shank, we have long forceps and the short outlet forceps. The shank length matters. Now the blade has a toe and a heel. The tip of the forceps is called as the toe, and where the blade is attached to the shank is called as the heel. So it has a toe and a heel. Okay. It also has a pelvic curve and cephalic curve. So when you're putting forceps, the part of the forceps which is covering the head, which is in position with the head, is the cephalic curve. As you see in the picture, the inner part of the forceps which comes in contact with the baby's head is called cephalic curve, and the pelvic curve is the curve on the outer part of the forceps, which follows the curve of Caris of the pelvis. Okay. Then there is a shank, and there are different types of locks called as English lock and sliding lock, depending upon the type of forceps. Now the blades here are, there is an opening in the blades. So these are called as fenestrated blades. So because of which there is less compression of the baby's head when you apply forceps. Sometimes these blades are solid, and there are some kinds of forceps called Tucker-Maclean forceps, where the blade, there is no opening in the blade and it is completely metal. So they are non-fenestrated blades. Okay. So the handles for which you pull. So you have to remember that forceps has two branches. Sometimes some people will use the term, they say that two blades are the forceps. You put the left blade first and right blade. So branch and blade can be used, but the correct terminology for forceps is an obstetric forceps consists of two branches. So each branch has a blade, a shank, a lock, and a handle. Next slide, please. So how do you identify a forceps blade? So when you go in Viva, they will ask you to articulate the forceps and show how you connect the forceps, and how do you identify which is the left. So when you try to lock the forceps, the blade which comes on the left side of the maternal pelvis is the left blade, and that on the right is the right blade. So the left blade will be lower. You hold the left blade first. On top of that, you take the right blade and you articulate it. Okay. When isolated, the tip should point upwards. The tip is the toe. So the pelvic curve, the tip should be outwards. The cephalic curve is inwards. Don't hold it in such a way that the cephalic curve is pointing outwards and the pelvic curve is forwards. Okay. So that is how you know it is the forceps blade. So how do you classify operative vaginal delivery? This classification was given by American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists. So to say that it is outlet, if you can see the scalp at the introitus without separating the labia, so it is almost crowning and you're putting forceps, it's called outlet forceps delivery. Fetal skull has reached the level of the pelvic floor. That is the skull, the leading point of the baby's head has reached the pelvic floor. The sagittal suture is in direct AP diameter. That is either it is direct occipito-anterior or it is LOA or ROA or direct occipito-posterior. You can't put forceps in transverse. In transverse, when the head is not rotated and you put forceps, it is not called outlet forceps delivery. So for outlet forceps, either it should be directly occipito-anterior or 45 degrees short of rotation. And the fetal head is at or on the perineum. Now here is when the confusion comes. Sometimes when you do a PV examination, you feel that at the perineum, the fetal head is there, but the skull has not yet reached the pelvic floor. That is why the additional criteria of skull has reached the pelvic floor comes here. Because when there is a cap put, because of the swelling of the fetal head, you feel that the head has come down, but actually the skull will be at much higher. So when you do PV examination, you should actually look for not where the scalp of the baby is, but where the skull, the bony part of the baby's head is. Okay, so when there is a large caput, the scalp of the baby would have reached the perineum, but the skull would be at a higher level. So it would not be an outlet forceps. It would be a low forceps. You would have confused it as outlet because of the level of the caput. So skull has reached the pelvic floor is an important criteria here. So that is when you call it as outlet forceps. Now low forceps is when the leading point of the fetal skull is at more than +2 station. Okay, so 0 station is, as I told you when I was taking pelvis, is when the head has reached the level of the ischial spines. Okay, so every centimeter below that is +1, +2. So when 2 centimeters below the ischial spine, the head it has reached, it is called low forceps. Here again, you classify it as A and B when less than 45 degrees rotation, like LOA or ROA, or more than 45 degrees rotation. So if the baby's head has reached the perineum, it is, and you apply forceps, it is called outlet. Your importance is the skull should have reached the pelvic floor. And when you do a PV examination and you feel that the head is not reached the pelvic floor, but it is about 2 centimeters below the level of ischial spine and you're applying forceps, it is low. Okay. Mid forceps is fetal head is engaged. Head is engaged means it has crossed 0 station, but it has not come to below +2. Mid forceps and high forceps is not followed anymore. So what you need to know is about outlet and low forceps. When head is not engaged, we hardly follow. So station is when you do a PV examination and you laterally you go to the pelvis and you feel the ischial spine. Okay. So when you feel the ischial spine and at that level the baby's head you feel, that is 0 station. Okay. So when the fetal head is at the level of the ischial spine, it is 0 station. And if it, for every centimeter above ischial spine, it is -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. Okay. And every centimeter below the ischial spine, the skull has gone 1 centimeter below the ischial spine, it is +1. When it has gone 2 centimeter below the ischial spine, it is +2. When it is at the perineum and there is crowning, it is +5. That means it is 5 centimeters below the level of the ischial spine. So that is how you give station from -5, where it is at the level of the pelvic brim, and 5 centimeter above the level of the ischial spine is -5. And when it is at the perineum and it is 5 centimeters below the level of ischial spine is +5. So below that centimeters is -5 to +5. This is station. Next slide, please. So what is the function of forceps? When you're applying forceps, what are you trying to achieve? One is traction. You're trying to pull the baby out. So the traction which you apply almost in the primigravida, you need about 20 kgs of force. And in the multigravida, 13 kgs of force is applied on the baby's head when you're applying traction. Another one is compression. When you're applying forceps, you're slightly compressing the diameter of the baby's head. From biparietal, you're getting it to bitemporal or super subparietal. So the diameter decreases. Rotation, keel and forceps helps in rotation from transverse to anterior position. Protection. Now it was believed that a preterm head, when it is going through a vaginal delivery, it is exposed to the forces of the pelvis and they can be damaged. So your forceps is acting like a protective cage and helping in delivery of the preterm head. It is also true for aftercoming head of breech. The difference between cephalic and breech presentation is in cephalic, when the baby is slowly, the head is slowly going through the pelvis, it has time for molding and getting adjusted to the pelvis. Whereas in breech, because the breech part comes first, the head does not have any time for adaptation in the pelvis. So when you're doing a forceps, you're protecting and slowly delivering the baby's head, like I told you in breech delivery. So this controlled delivery of the head is possible by forceps when you apply for a breech. So that protection component comes here. Vectis. So this terminology is used when you don't use both the branches of the forceps, you use a single branch. And using the single branch, you just hook out the baby. This is commonly used in cesarean section. So when there is a deeply engaged head and it is difficult for your fingers to reach deep into the pelvis and extract the baby's head, you put one single blade of forceps and elevate the head and then deliver. So this is called as forceps, single blade of forceps being used as vectis. So these are the different functions. So what are the indications for forceps, vaginal delivery forceps are basically prevention and protection. You're trying to prevent any morbidity to the mother or fetus by applying forceps. Okay. and you're trying to protect the baby when a sudden jeopardy is happening and you want to deliver the baby early. So usually it is because of inadequate expulsive efforts. The mother is not bearing down adequately and you need to expedite the delivery. And maternal exhaustion, mother is exhausted, she's had a very long labor, and when the time has come to bear down, she's unable to bear down. This also happens when you have given epidural analgesia. So when there is epidural analgesia, the bearing down effort is not there, and you need to use forceps to complete delivery, or where expulsive efforts are to be avoided, like in cardiac disease and hypertensive crisis, cerebrovascular diseases, etc. You don't want the mother to exert herself. Okay, you don't want her to bear down. So that is when you put your forceps in and you deliver. And fetal is suddenly you feel that the baby is going in for distress, non-reassuring fetal heart rate. What is a normal fetal heart rate? What is the normal range of the fetal heart rate? Yeah, what is the range? Yeah, around 110 to 160. So, 120 to 160 is also fine. 110 to 160 is also fine. So, when there is fetal bradycardia will be there in second stage of labor. But as soon as the contraction passes off, the baby's heart rate should come up. Okay, if there is a continuous fall in the baby's heart rate, bradycardia, or there is tachycardia, then you need to go in and put your forceps. For after coming head of the breech, I told you the use of the forceps. What is the forceps used for breech delivery? What is the name of the forceps? And this forceps is the best method to deliver the breech compared to the other two techniques of the delivery of the head, which are Morris Mellowheat, Piper's forceps. Okay, so Morris Mellowheat and Burns Marshall method, compared to the two, forceps is the best method of delivering the head of the breech. And suspicion of fetal compromise, when you feel there is meconium, or there is sudden cord prolapse, or there is abruptio placenta, you're suspecting all this is happening, you quickly go in, put your forceps, deliver the baby. So this is suspected fetal jeopardy. And others are prolonged second stage of labor, more than 2 hours in a nullipara and more than 1 hour in a multipara. You feel that you should go in and deliver. Or to cut short second stage, severe preeclampsia, cardiac disease, and post-cesarean pregnancy. We don't want her to labor for a long time in second stage. That increases her BP, and also cesarean section puts a stress on the scar. So when she has reached the perineal phase, that is the head is down, you put an outlet forceps and deliver. Next slide, please. There are specific indications for forceps, which are delivery of the head at assisted breech delivery and assisted delivery of preterm. I told you it acts like a protective cage for the baby when you're delivering. Controlled delivery of head at cesarean section. Both vacuum and forceps can be used in cesarean section. But when it is a very high head and a floating head, you put vacuum, suck it out and deliver. And forceps you're using when it is a deeply engaged head, and you put your forceps in and extract it. And assisted delivery with a face presentation. So forceps can also be used in a face presentation, whereas the vacuum cannot be used both in all these specific indications, like the breech delivery, preterm infant, and face. These are specific indications for vacuum, and these are the contraindications for specific indications for forceps and contraindications for vacuum. If there is a breech, do not put vacuum. If there is a preterm baby, you will cause cerebral hemorrhage, do not put vacuum. If there is a face presentation, you are going to injure the eye socket or cause a hematoma. So do not put a vacuum. But these are specific indications for forceps. When you need to use an instrument under these conditions, always think of forceps and do not think of vacuum, because these are contraindications for vacuum. Next slide, please. So the prerequisites, commonest question is what prerequisites? This is your checklist before you apply any instrumental delivery. The mnemonic is forceps. Okay. F is for full dilatation of cervix. If the cervix is not fully dilated and you apply forceps, you're going to cause deep tears of the cervix. Okay. So you're causing traumatic PPH. So always check for full dilatation of cervix. Plus your traction is going to fail. You're not going to be able to pull the forceps. Okay. Occipito anterior is better. You can also put forceps to occipito posterior and deliver it, but there are higher chances of risk to the mother and the baby. So always confirm that it is occipito anterior. So how would you confirm it is occipito anterior? Which fontanelle will you feel on vaginal examination? Is it the posterior fontanelle or the anterior fontanelle? Yes, the posterior fontanelle. Okay, so you have to, so when you do a PV examination, you should not feel the larger diamond shaped fontanelle. If you're easily feeling the large diamond shaped fontanelle, you feel that something is wrong with this patient and it is a deflexed head. Okay, you should feel the small triangular fontanelle or the posterior fontanelle. And where should you feel this posterior fontanelle? Should it be near the pubic symphysis or near the sacral promontory? Yes, it should be near the pubic symphysis. Okay, so when you do a PV examination, the most important is you feel the posterior fontanelle, and that should be near the pubic symphysis. That means it is occipito-anterior. So when you do a vaginal examination, you should not feel any cervix, and you should be feeling the posterior fontanelle, and the posterior fontanelle should be closer to the symphysis pubis. The next thing on PV examination is membranes should be ruptured. You cannot put any instrument if the membranes are intact. And contractions. There should be good uterine contractions. Otherwise, that contraction is going to assist you in your forceps. Okay, you're expediting the delivery. So there has to be some effort. Contraction should be there, bearing down efforts of the mother should be there, and you're assisting that. You're helping that by putting traction, okay, using the forceps or vacuum. So good contractions should be there. What are good contractions in labor? How many contractions should be there in 10 minutes? And how long they should last? Yeah, 3 contractions, minimum 3 contractions in 10 minutes, and each contraction lasting for 40 seconds. Yes. So that is good contraction. So you keep your hand on the fundus of the uterus, and you should see that there should be 3 contractions in 10 minutes, at least lasting for 45 seconds. Empty bladder and bowel. Okay. So you don't need to put an indwelling Foley's catheter. This rubber catheter, which can be just intermittent catheterization, can be done. And the bladder has to be emptied, and bowel will be emptied when a patient is in labor. Enema will be given. Pelvis should be adequate. It's very difficult to assess pelvis adequacy when you're applying forceps. It should be assessed early in labor, and station should be known. Do not get confused with the caput and the swelling of the baby's head. You should try to feel the bony prominence of the skull, then try to feel ischial spine and see what is the relationship between the ischial spine and the skull. So that should be at least 2 centimeters below the level of the ischial spine. Another method of assessing station is by abdominal method. Okay, so abdominally you're feeling how much of the baby's head is palpable. So always to put an instrumental delivery less than 1/5, not even 1/5 part of the baby's head. If the entire head is above the level of the pubic symphysis, you say it is 5/5 palpable. Your 5 fingers can go on the abdomen. Okay, so if you do an examination and you can ballot the head easily, do not try instrumental delivery. Okay, the baby's head is not engaged. Don't even try to do a vaginal examination for station. You're easily ballotting the head, and 5/5 of the head is palpable means it's a contraindication for instrumental delivery. Straight away take the patient for cesarean section. But only 1/5 or no head is palpable, then you do your PV examination and this is taken. If less than 1/5 of the head is palpable, that means it has crossed the level of ischial spines and the head is engaged. Okay, so these are your prerequisites. Remember the mnemonic of forceps: full dilatation, occipito-anterior, ruptured membranes, contractions, empty bladder and bowel, pelvis adequate, station. Some people would have catheterized like a Foley's catheter, so that bulb should be deflated and removed before you put a forceps. With the bulb inside, do not attempt a delivery. So it is better to use a rubber catheter for intermittent catheterization. Next slide, please. So other prerequisites are, even if it is not occipito-anterior, you should be very clear about the fetal head position, which is actually the difficulty. It is not very easily found out when there is caput. When there is swelling, all your fontanelles, sutures, everything gets obscured. So in expert hands, you can also put forceps for occipito-posterior. Okay, so your second prerequisite of occipito-anterior is not absolutely necessary, but knowing the fetal head position, you should know that it is occipito-posterior and going to put your forceps, because your direction of forceps pull is going to matter. Informed consent. Okay, the patient's attenders and the patient has to be informed that there is a difficulty in delivery and you're applying forceps. Risk of maternal injury, fetal injury has to be informed. And if they don't consent, then you can go for directly for cesarean section. Okay, so everything has to be consent, and this consent has to be documented. Experienced operator. So training is very important in a person who has performed many deliveries. It's forceps is more difficult to learn than vacuum. So if in an unskilled hand, I would say vacuum is better. So to apply forceps, there has to be an experienced operator. Adequate technique should be there. So basically, technique depends upon your knowledge of the the posterior fontanelle and the presentation. Presence of pediatrician. It is going to be a difficult delivery. Forceps comes in only when you're facing some difficulty in the vaginal delivery. So the baby might go into compromise. Yeah, mother and father's consent, both the attenders should be told. So presence of a pediatrician should be there. Next slide. So types of application of forceps is cephalic application and pelvic application. So ideal method of application is cephalic. Cephalic application is when you put it directly over the parietal eminence, the biparietal diameter. Each branch is going directly over the baby's head. So the sagittal suture comes in midline of the forceps and it is cephalic application. Okay. And so that is the forceps you're applying like this in occipito-anterior position. Now, if it is left occipito-anterior, you are supposed to put the forceps in this direction. So because the head would not have rotated 45 degrees short of rotation, so cephalic application means it has to be over the parietal eminences, the forceps. So then you're supposed to apply the forceps like this. In occipito-anterior, you're supposed to apply the forceps like this. Right occipito-anterior, you're supposed to apply the forceps 45 degrees short. So depending upon where the baby's sagittal suture is and parallel to the sagittal suture when you're applying forceps, that is called cephalic application. Pelvic application is you're going to always apply your forceps straight. Okay, left forceps in the left side, right forceps right side. You don't care what is the position of the baby's head or the sagittal suture. So if you apply like this and the baby's LOA, you're going to apply the forceps maybe on the brow or the eyes of the baby. Okay, so it can put serious compression effect on the cranium. This must be avoided. So you should always attempt to do cephalic application, for which you should do a PV examination and find out what is the direction of the sagittal suture and what is the position of the posterior and anterior fontanelle, and then apply your forceps. Next slide. So the steps of forceps application is first you identify the blades and do an application in front. Do not go inside the pelvis. This is called as ghosting. You act as if how you're going to put the blade. So you imagine that it is occipito-anterior. You lock the blades and keep it in front of the pelvis. This is called ghosting or phantom application before you directly go into that. After that, you apply the blades. I will show you later how to apply. Locking of the blades. Then you lock the blades and pull. So the direction of pull should always follow the curve of Keres. So low forceps, the head is slightly higher. So you pull it downwards and then forwards, and then you pull it upwards. So this figure is showing you application of forceps for low forceps. Here the head is higher, so first you put it downwards and backwards. Then when it is reaching the perineum, you pull it horizontally. After that, delivery of the head in cephalic is by extension, so you have to pull it upwards. Okay. Now outlet forceps, the head is in a much lower level. So you just follow 2 and 3. You don't have to do 1. You pull it horizontally till you can see the crowning of the head. Once crowning is seen, you're supposed to deliver the head by extension. So pull it upwards. After that, remove the blade. So identify which is left and right first. Do a ghosting in front of the mother's pelvis and lock the forceps so you have confirmation that which is left and which is right. Put your left forceps in first, then your right forceps. Lock the blades. Okay. Then you give your traction and remove it. So what is the anesthesia which we use for forceps application? These are all common practical questions asked in exam to know whether you have actually seen. Many students would not have seen a forceps delivery, and we come up with interesting answers. So what is the anesthesia used for forceps? Before you apply forceps or vacuum, what anesthesia would you like to give? Yeah, pudendal block can be given. Yeah. Never see a general anesthesia, spinal anesthesia. It's not a surgery. Or just perineal infiltration with lignocaine. What we do for an episiotomy, local injection. Ideally, pudendal block has to be given where the pudendal nerve has to be blocked. We're not using it routinely. So very good if you see pudendal block. But even whatever anesthesia you give to do an episiotomy, that is perineal infiltration with lignocaine is also sufficient. That is definitely sufficient for a vacuum. Okay. So that is the anesthesia which is given. Next slide, please. So clinical checks to say that you have applied the forceps. Sagittal suture is in the midline of the shanks. Okay, if you see the D picture, so exactly in the middle of the 2 blades, in the midline of your shanks, can you see the shank? and the handle, the line on the handle should be corresponding to the sagittal suture. Okay. And the operator is unable to place more than a fingertip between. So if you try to put your finger between the baby's head and the blade, only one tip of the finger has to be going between the blade and the baby's head. If more than a finger, 2-3 fingers are going, that means your forceps application is not cephalic and the baby's head is deflexed and you have not applied it properly. Posterior fontanelle is not more than, so 1 finger breadth above your blade should be a posterior fontanelle. Okay, so what you have to remember in instrumental delivery is you should always apply a vacuum or a forceps closer to the posterior fontanelle than the anterior fontanelle, because when you pull on the posterior side of the baby's head, you're creating more flexion. You want flexion because flexion causes the smallest diameter anteroposteriorly and transversely, which is biparietal and suboccipitobregmatic. So you want the smallest part of the baby's head. Okay, you don't want a deflexed head. So your posterior fontanelle should just be about 1 finger breadth above the plane of the shank of forceps. So these are the 3 checks. So after applying forceps, these 3 things you have to check. The sagittal suture should be corresponding to the midline of the shanks. You try to insert a finger, not more than 1 fingertip should be there between the head and the blade. And the posterior fontanelle is not more than 1 finger breadth above the plane of the shank of forceps. After this, you pull. Okay, if this is not so, then you have to recheck your position, do a PV examination and see what is the level of the head and how is it, and then you do your reapply your forceps. Next slide, please. Okay, so the picture A is they have identified that which is the left blade and the right blade, and the left blade is applied first. Okay, so the left hand is holding the handle. This position is called ping pong position, like the backhand of a table tennis. Very light grip, not a very firm grip. It has to be very light grip. Thumb on one side, the other fingers on the other side. The right hand is creating, the 4 fingers of the right hand are creating a space between the vagina and the skull. Okay, they are making space. Don't directly put your forceps in. It is going to tear the vagina. So your 4 fingers are going to create like a guard and not letting the forceps directly come into contact with the vagina when you're inserting it. Okay, so the 4 fingers are safeguarding and creating a space between the lateral vaginal wall and the skull. Your thumb is on the heel of the blade, and that is the one which is guiding. So the maximum force applied is by your thumb of your right hand, not by the left hand. The left hand is just giving it steady, holding it steadily. The thumb is gently pushing the forceps blade. So it starts from upper and goes like this. So this is how you apply your forceps. Okay, so the thumb should be at the heel. So now the second picture B, the left blade is applied. That is where the inside the blade is going to be. And now the forceps is resting on the perineum. So this is when it is correctly applied. This is what is going to be. So the left blade is called the lower blade. Okay, because above that comes the right blade. In the same way, here the right hand is in ping pong position and the left hand is guarding the vagina, and you're putting it in. After which this is locking. So you lock. So when you lock, the handles should come together. If you cannot lock properly, there will be a space in the handles, then you know that your forces application is wrong. Then you do your 3 checks, which are sagittal suture is in the midline of the shanks. You cannot put more than 1 fingertip between the you cannot put more than 1 fingertip between the blade and the head, and posterior fontanelle is only 1 finger breadth above the level of the shanks. So that is your 3 checks. Comes your E slide, which is traction. So if it is a low forceps, it is downwards and backwards till it reaches crowning. After crowning, pull it horizontally. Once crowning and the head is coming out, then you have to extend the head, so pull it upwards. So during this continuous perineal support is there, because forceps is very high risk of perineal tears and anal injury and rectal injury. So another person should be supporting the pelvis. And episiotomy, in a primigravida, if there is no space in the pelvis, you can give an episiotomy initially, like in A figure, and already episiotomy you can see. So already episiotomy is given. But if there is enough space in a multigravida, you wait till the E picture where there is bulging and the perineum is really thinned out. And at that time, you can give an episiotomy and pull out the head. Okay. So the timing of episiotomy either can be given initially, or when the head is really bulging out the perineum and there is crowning, that time you can give an episiotomy. So both can be done. And sometimes episiotomy is not required, they say. In Western cultures, they are not very much in favor of episiotomy. And they don't give an episiotomy unless it is threatening to tear. They give a good perineal support. Okay, so E is bimalar, biparietal placement of the blades. So it is on the malar eminences, and over the parietal eminences, the blade should be there. So that is how is the correct application of the forceps. Yeah, next slide. What are the difficulties in forceps application? You can't apply the blades. Okay, you're trying to apply the blades, and you just can't push the blade into the pelvis and to the side of the baby's head. It's not going in. So that is because your cervix is not fully dilated, or it is an unengaged head. The head is very high, or unrotated head. So that problem you can have during application of the forceps. Difficulty in locking. You can't lock if it is an unrotated head. If it is an occipital transverse and you're trying to apply forceps like this, you cannot lock, because one side is going over the baby's face and the other side is going over the occiput, and you can't lock the forceps. Improper insertion of blade is also another reason. You have not inserted it deep enough and you can't lock it. Okay. Difficulty in traction. Undiagnosed occipito-posterior. The occiput is towards the sacral promontory. You have not diagnosed it because of caput, you have missed it. So pulling in an occipito-posterior is very, very difficult. So your traction will be difficult. Faulty cephalic application. It is pelvic application. Again, you have not applied directly that the sagittal suture comes in the midline. You have applied it over the baby's face or something else. So traction is difficult. Slipping of the blades can also happen, again, occipito-posterior. So occipito-posterior, you really need an experienced obstetrician to do a delivery as face to pubis when it is direct occipito-posterior. So whenever you're having difficulty in forceps, you should always think of occipito-posterior. Maybe the occiput has not rotated anteriorly and you have to reassess the situation. Yeah, next slide, please. So what are the complications? So as I told you, compared to vacuum, maternal complications are more. Vacuum, because it is soft and plastic, it does not distend the perineum much. So maternal injuries are very less. But the metal forceps, and because of deep application into the pelvis, maternal injuries are more common with forceps. Okay. So there can be vaginal laceration. Large tears in the vagina, they can go up to the fornix, very difficult to suture. Cervical tear, because if you have applied when the cervix is not fully dilated. Extension of episiotomy, third degree and fourth degree perineal tear. What is a third degree perineal tear? So there are 4 degrees of perineal tear: first degree, second degree, third degree, and fourth degree. Fourth degree is a complete perineal tear. What is the third degree of perineal tear? Which structure is injured? Anal sphincter. Okay, yeah, correct. So the anal sphincter is injured is third degree. It does not involve the mucosa of the anal wall. Okay. Fourth degree is the wall of the anus, or the mucosa of the anal wall is injured is fourth degree. Only the sphincter is injured, but the mucosal wall is intact. It is third degree. Okay. So the sphincteral injuries, they will be undiagnosed, because you do a PV examination, parietal examination, anus is intact, and you sometimes miss sphincteric injury. So later on, the patient comes to you with the incontinence of feces and flatus incontinence, no control over flatus. Okay. So all that happens in a third degree perineal tear. Okay. So nerve injury, if you go in deep and you try to push in your blade forcibly, so near your pelvis, near the sacroiliac spine comes all your nerves, femoral and the lumbosacral trunk, and they can have nerve injuries. Postpartum hemorrhage, traumatic because of your vaginal tear or cervical tear. Atonic, because the uterus has been in labor for too long. Once the baby is forcibly delivered, it doesn't contract. Okay, or both might be there, and she may go into shock. Sometimes the bleeding will be above the level of the level of the broad ligament. There might be an injury in the broad ligament, and there will be intraperitoneal bleeding, and you might not diagnose it vaginally. So these are all worst case scenarios, but scary, which can happen. Anesthetic complications when you're using any anesthesia. Puerperal sepsis. Remote or painful perineal scars, because the episiotomy is quite longer compared to this. It might not heal well. Dyspareunia, because there might be long tears in the vagina, and you would have used about 3 to 4 sutures to suture the vagina. So pain during coitus might be there. Low backache, that happens because of the pressure on the cervix, that in turn causes a pressure on the uterosacral ligament because of the pull. Genital prolapse, again undilated cervix, and you put a forceps. So again, a strain on the uterosacral and cardinal ligaments. So there might be tears on those ligaments causing prolapse. Stress incontinence on a full bladder. When you try to apply forceps, there might be stress urinary incontinence, and anal sphincter because of third degree perineal tear. So asphyxia, the baby is already under stress because it has been in labor for long. So there are some chances where babies come later on develop cerebral palsy or cerebral palsy due to forceps application, because during the delivery, not enough oxygenation has gone to the brain. Facial bruising can happen when by mistake, you do a pelvic application. You don't assess where the sagittal suture is, and you end up injuring the baby's face. Intracranial hemorrhage, rupture of great vein of Galen. Cephalhematoma. Cephalhematoma is what is the level of injury in cephalhematoma? Where is the bleeding collecting? At which level of the? Under the cephalhematoma is otherwise called as? Facial palsy is when the forceps is applied on the facial nerve and the baby can have facial palsy. Skull fractures, if you have not applied the forceps properly or undue force is applied, yes, below periosteum. So subperiosteal hemorrhages, cephalhematoma, it does not cross the midline because the level of it stops at the level of the bone. So that's how you diagnose cephalhematoma. It is subperiosteal hemorrhage. Okay. Cervical spine injury happens in rotational forceps. Okay. But these injuries are much, much more greater in a vacuum because of the suction created on the baby's skull. Okay. So the nerve injuries and all your vaginal injuries, maternal injuries are more in forceps, and all your baby's hemorrhages and all are more common in vacuum. A correctly applied forceps should not cause any facial injury because you're diagnosed where is the sagittal suture and you're doing a correct biparietal bimalleal application. You are not supposed, usually will not end up in a injury. But when you have done a pelvic application and you don't know exactly what is the position, then you end up with all these injuries. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So these are the injuries which you can see. On the left side is the skull fracture. It is very difficult for the obstetrician even to explain to the parents how this happened. And in this, you can see facial palsy of the baby. Plus the forceps, you can see the forceps mark, the blade mark over the cheek of the baby. And this forceps was applied over the cheek of the baby and also over the eyes. So retinal hemorrhage also will be there in this baby. And later complications, they will have jaundice. Pathological jaundice will also develop. So it's a tough time. So assessment and good judgment is very important on part of the obstetrician to prevent these from happening. Okay, so these are the complications of forceps. Next slide, please. Now there are terminologies which are really liked by examiners. They are prophylactic forceps, trial forceps, field forceps. Is this due to completely the fault of obstetrician? It is sometimes obstetrician is also under high stress. The head would have reached the level of the perineum. You would have crossed the stage where you can easily do a safe cesarean section. It's very difficult to extract the head which is deep in the pelvis. Or sometimes the patient is referred to you from somewhere and there is a large caput. When there is a caput, you don't know where is the sagittal suture. You don't know where the fontanelle is. So because of which you don't know which direction you're putting forceps. So you're doing it in the what you think you're doing best for the mother and the baby, and this can happen. So I wouldn't say that it is the fault of the obstetrician. There are certain circumstances where really you cannot assess and you're trying to work in the best interest of the patient and you're trying to apply your forceps. Now, so Deely's prophylactic forceps was popularized by Bolivar Deely. So Deely said that when you apply forceps to shorten second stage of labor, you should call it as prophylactic forceps. So what are these conditions? Eclampsia, convulsions, heart disease, previous cesarean section. You don't want the head to be too long at the perineum. Okay, either for the sake of the mother or for the sake of the baby. Post maturity or low birth weight babies also, they have more chance of going in for asphyxia, low oxygen delivery. So you don't want the babies to be under stress or the mother to be under stress. So try to quickly finish the second stage of labor. You apply forceps. It's called prophylactic forceps. So that's what is prophylactic forceps. Okay, next slide. Trial of forceps. So trial forceps is when obstetrician feels that this forceps might not be successful, but I am going to give it a try and see that if it is going to work, or else I'm going to do a cesarean section. Okay. So trial forceps should not be done in the delivery room. It should always be done in the operating theater. So there will be two obstetricians, the senior one who is trying to do a forceps, anesthesia, pediatrician, and obstetrician, everybody should be there. And another obstetrician is scrubbed to do a emergency cesarean section. So if a forceps doesn't work, you're thinking that you're going to go forward with a cesarean section. You're just going to try. So this is like a trial of labor when there is a moderate borderline pelvis and you're trying to deliver the baby. So same way, in a borderline pelvis, you're giving it a single try, and you think that if it doesn't work out, you're going to abandon it in favor of cesarean section. If moderate traction fails to overcome the resistance. Sometimes large amount of traction is required when you're putting the forceps. Even the patient moves to the forceps and the patient comes off the table. So that level of traction should never be applied in forceps. So moderate traction should be used. So you should not pull with your elbow extended forceps. You should always pull with your elbow flexed. Okay. So due to which there is, when the elbow is flexed, some Hiba's question, I can't see it completely. Is there any advantage of forceps over? I couldn't see the full question. Okay, you can type it into the question answer, then I can see the question and answer it. So when you pulling forceps, moderate traction is when you're pulling the forceps, your elbow should be flexed, so not more than 20 kg force is applied. And some people, they rest their foot on the operating table so that they don't fall back. So all that should not be done. So moderate traction is that amount of traction, about 20 kg force is applied. So do it with your elbow flexed and pull the forceps. Okay, so with moderate traction, if it does not come, then you go for cesarean section. Definitely there is advantage of forceps over cesarean section. You should always know, and you should always explain to your patient that a vaginal delivery, a safe vaginal delivery, is much more better than a cesarean section. Less morbidity to the mother, less morbidity to the baby. A cesarean section is a more morbid option you can give over a vaginal delivery. So if you think your forceps delivery is safe, that you can do a reasonably good delivery without injuring the mother or the baby, you should always try to go for forceps over a cesarean section. If you feel that you are going to do a difficult forceps delivery at the cost of giving an asphyxiated baby or a dead baby, or your forceps application is difficult and you might cause maternal injuries, you should go in favor of cesarean. So a lot of that comes with experience and clinical judgment, where you decide whether you will go with a forceps or cesarean. So that is the advantage of forceps. If you can do a good forceps delivery, definitely it is much more better. A normal delivery is a natural thing, so it is definitely better compared to a cesarean section. So what are the conditions for trial of forceps? Obese mother, it's very difficult to deliver. So you might not succeed. So you go to the OT and you try to put a forceps. Okay, clinically big baby weight more than 3 kg also. When you're suspecting that it is not. Occipital posterior, I told you, is very difficult delivery. So better to try it in the OT. Okay, mid cavity delivery, which is high, we don't try to do it. When 1/5 head palpable per abdomen, again, we don't try to do this. So you feel that you might fail and you want to try forceps, go to the OT and try, keep your anesthetist by your side, and then you try for your forceps delivery. So that is your trial of forceps. Next slide, please. Failed forceps. Now, failed forceps is, you can say, like how Manish said, the obstetrician is at fault here. Here, you don't think that you are not keeping anything ready for cesarean section, and you are, in your ego, you are trying to do a forceps and you're not trying to come to face with the terms that there can be a failed forceps. So you're doing a vaginal delivery and you don't want to abandon it at any point. Okay, so you feel that you're going to do a forceps delivery and you want to succeed in that forceps delivery, and when it fails, you don't give up and do a cesarean section. We call it as a failed forceps. This usually ends up with the baby dying or the mother having severe traumatic PPH. Okay, so it's a deliberate attempt in vaginal delivery with forceps. So trial forceps, when you do it, is not called failed forceps, because you know that you might fail. You have that understanding, so you don't give such a traction and you don't try repeatedly. You do one try and you take it for cesarean. That is not called failed forceps, but you're accepting that it might fail and you're doing something. Failed forceps is when you are intent on doing a vaginal forceps delivery and you have not thought about failing. So this should not be done, but again, it is the judgment of the obstetrician. It is not when in that high pressure situation, you don't know that you're doing it. Okay, so this should not be done. Failed forceps, yes, it should not be done. So a failed forceps is, at the end of this, we were unable to deliver the baby, or you delivered the baby and the baby was dead, or you delivered the baby and the patient went into shock because the amount of traction was too high. So when this happens, it's called failed forceps. And the common causes are you had not assessed the patient properly, the cervix was undilated, You did not know that it was unrotated occipital posterior. There was CPD, which you thought was minor but turned out to be major. When there was hydrocephalus, which had been missed, unrecognized malpresentation, it was a face or bro, or a constriction ring, where actually you really have no way of finding out that there was a constriction ring and this has happened to you. Okay, next slide, please. So coming to vacuum. So the vacuum was invented around 18th century. So initially they had used glass cups for the treatment of depressed skull fractures in adults and children. So when they put this glass cup and they applied suction, the depressed skull fracture was elevated. So they tried to apply the same principle to put a suction on the baby's head and to deliver it out. Okay, the person who is who has made this famous is Malmstrom. So his metal cups are still being used. So the metal cups which we're using now are were invented by Malmstrom. So ventouse or vacuum is an instrumental device designed to assist delivery by creating a vacuum between it and the fetal scalp. Okay, so by creating this vacuum and by pulling on that vacuum created, you are giving traction, you are doing a ventouse delivery. Next slide, please. So these are the different cups. You can see the metal cups. So these are the Malmstrom's cups which were used. The next slide, the next picture, you can see a handheld generator. So with the hand, you press that and you then generate the vacuum. This is a Kiwi cup, which is a slightly flatter cup. The last picture, that Narang Enterprise picture, this is a vacuum which we are commonly using in our labor rooms. This is polyethylene. Okay. So that Narang Enterprises picture is that polyethylene vacuum which we are using. Okay. So that is a suction machine. So there is a suction machine that blood bottles, which creates suction, and there is a suction tubing. So at the other end of the tubing, you connect it to the vacuum device. Okay. So there were modifications of the Malmstrom cup, which were called as the this is called as a bird's cup. Okay, for occipital posterior position. There are different types of silastic cups, silicone cups, soft cups. So basically, vacuums are divided into rigid cups and soft cups. Now, the rigid cups are made up of metal or even rigid silicone. Okay, the advantages over this is failure is very less. It doesn't pop off easily, and you are more likely to succeed. The Kiwi cup, which you can see, third picture next to the Narang Enterprises picture, is also the rigid cup. Now, the polyethylene cup which we're using is a soft cup. The problem is it pops off easily. It does not maintain the vacuum, so your chance of failing is more. But the advantage of using soft cup is that you have less chance of fetal injury. It won't injure the scalp and the hemorrhages are much less. So Kiwi cup and BD Odon devices are the newer advances in vacuum cup, where they create a very good vacuum and less chance of popping off. Okay. Next slide. So basically, a vacuum has a suction cup with 4 sizes: 30, 40, 50, 60 mm. 6 centimeters is the maximum. You have to select the largest possible cup size for that baby. Okay. Then it has a vacuum generator, that vacuum bottle, and a traction tubing. Okay. So the maximum pressure which you should apply is 600 millimeters of mercury. So when there is 600 millimeters of mercury, it has come to, then you try to pull. So there is a picture, you're connecting it to an electrical vacuum device, and where suction is created through electricity. And this is a hand pump where you're correcting the suction. So this B is called as a Mitivac cup, the shape of the cup. A is Malmstrom, it is a metal cup. Okay, so this is my A picture is a hard cup and B picture is a soft cup. Okay, so that is the picture. Contraindications for ventouse. Okay, any presentation other than vertex, face presentation, breech presentation, no vacuum application, or in those you can apply forceps for after coming head of breech and face. Preterm baby has it's a softer head and you can cause more scalp injury. Do not apply ventouse, go for forceps. Forceps is beneficial in preterm, vacuum is harmful in preterm. Okay, suspected fetal coagulation disorder. Baby has alloimmune thrombocytopenia. Baby's platelet count is low, genetic disorder. You apply vacuum, more chance of hemorrhage to the baby's head. Suspected fetal macrosomia, more than 4 kg. It is not going to come with your traction force in a vacuum. The amount of traction in a vacuum is only about 9 to 10 kgs. Traction force is higher in forces up to 20 kg. So that much traction is not sufficient to deliver a baby. Another one is bone disorders of the baby, osteopenia and all. Don't apply vacuum or forceps. So rare conditions. So these are the contraindications for vacuum. Next slide, please. Advantages of vacuum are, it can be used in unrotated or man-rotated head. like in occipital posterior, occipital transverse, very difficult to apply forceps. You will end up applying the forceps on the baby's face. But vacuum, you can apply in that. It helps in auto rotation. When you're pulling, the baby's head rotates. So for unrotated head, it is better to apply vacuum and rotate it. It is not space occupying device. So in a primary rigid perineum, it is better to go with vacuum. Traction force is less, so less injury to the mother's genitalia. And analgesia needed is less. Perineal block is not required because the soft cup is introduced. Reduced maternal pelvic floor injury. Okay, so when you're pulling the perineal injury, 3rd-degree perineal tear is less with vacuum. Okay, postpartum pain is also less because one large metal instrument was not introduced into her vagina. So obviously the pain is less, easier to learn. Okay, so when we teach our postgraduates, we teach them vacuum first and then we teach them forceps. Simplicity of use in delivery makes it convenient. Even in UK, nurses and midwives are using vacuums. You don't need an obstetrician to put a vacuum. Whereas in forceps, where you think that more force is required, you try to go with forceps. And they say that forceps can be, it can quickly finish the delivery because vacuum, you need to connect the vacuum, you need the pressure to build up, takes longer. So when it's fetal distress and the baby's heart rate is really dropping, try to go for forceps. You can use it in preterm, you can use it in face, you can use it in after coming head of bridge. Lesser fetal injury and higher rate of vaginal successful vaginal delivery. Vacuum, if the vacuum pops off, you cannot use it again and again. Cup detachment occurs when vacuum is not maintained. And there are many types. They have different types of forceps for different indications. So more types of forceps are available. So that's the advantage of forceps over vacuum. Next slide. Now this concept is very important, which is flexion point. Okay. So this flexion point is an imaginary point on the sagittal suture, which is 6 centimeters from the anterior fontanelle and 3 centimeters from the posterior fontanelle. Okay. Now, why this flexion point is important is the center of your vacuum cup should be corresponding to the flexion point. So that is where your force of traction is going to come. So when your center of the vacuum cup is corresponding to the flexion point, when you're pulling the vacuum, you're going to flex the baby's head. So flexion is always better because the smallest diameter, which is suboccipitobregmatic, will come out through the pelvis. Okay. So how do you confirm flexion point? Once you apply your vacuum, try to put and feel that only 2 fingers are going between the rim, anterior rim of the rim of the vacuum and the anterior fontanelle. So you should always try to put the vacuum as close to the posterior fontanelle as possible. So when you try to put it as close to the posterior fontanelle, your center of vacuum is going to correspond to the flexion point. So after applying the vacuum, you should only be, if you feel that your rim of the vacuum is closer to the anterior fontanelle, that means it is not close to the flexion point. When you're going to pull, the baby's head is going to get deflexed. So when you pull closer to the posterior fontanelle, it is going to get flexed, and this is how it delivers. Now, even when you apply forceps, your forceps should be corresponding to the flexion point. When you put it over the parietal eminences, both the blades will be pulling traction over the flexion point. So closer to the posterior fontanelle, your instrument should be applied so that the type of delivery will cause flexion of the head. So this flexion point is an important terminology in vacuum delivery. Next slide. So the different types of application of vacuum. Okay. The best application is flexing median, where the midline of the vacuum is corresponding to the midline of the sagittal suture is exactly in half of the vacuum, and your flexion point is corresponding to the center of the cup. Okay. Flexing paramedian, where you put it to over one parietal bone, but still your center of the vacuum, it is in the line of the flexion point. So this is flexing paramedian. Deflexing median, you put it over the sagittal suture, but it's not over the flexion point. So you're going to deflex the head when you pull this vacuum in picture C. D is the worst application which you can do. You are very far from the flexion point. You're closer to anterior fontanelle, and you're also quite far from the sagittal suture. So you're going to cause asynclitism and deflection, and your baby is not going to deliver. So when you do this, when you do deflexing paramedian application, your cup is going to pop off and your vacuum is going to fail. So always try to get the sagittal suture in the middle of the vacuum and put your vacuum as close to the posterior fontanelle as possible. Next slide. That's flexing median application. So application of cup. So you can see this flexion point. They have applied about 2 finger breadth behind the anterior fontanelle. And then traction. Traction again should follow your curve Caras. If it is high, downwards and backwards, horizontal, and then upwards. If it is only at the perineum, horizontal till its crowning, and then upwards. Traction. So when you're giving traction, right hand is pulling, your left hand is holding over the vacuum so that the vacuum doesn't pop off. Okay, so there is a two-hand technique. Right hand pulls and the left hand is giving support over the cup so that you don't pop it off when you're pulling, and the direction of traction should be perpendicular. So when you're pulling, it should be perpendicular. If you pull it in this direction, the cup is going to pop off from the scalp. Next slide. So this is Chinon. This is another terminology. Flexion point and Chinon are two terminologies you should know in vacuum. So the Chinon is a French term which comes from the French top knot which the women used to use. So this is nothing but an artificial caput succedaneum which you're creating. Okay. So by looking at the position of the Chinon, if you want to reassess your case, you will know that what kind of application you had done. So your Chinon should be closer to the posterior fontanelle. That means your application was flexing median. Okay. So when you're putting a metal cup, so this metal cup, the pressure builds up slowly over 2 minutes. During that, the part of the scalp is pulled into the vacuum and this Chinon is formed. Now this Chinon acts like a knob, and on this knob you're giving traction, you're pulling the baby's head. Sounds barbaric, but that is what they're doing. They're trying to create like a knob on the baby's head and putting traction on the knob. So this knob which they created, this artificial swelling on the baby's scalp which they created, Chinon, is then traction is applied on that. Yeah. Next slide. So the direction of the traction now, a picture, what you can see is the Kiwi's Omni Cup. Kiwi Omni Cup was invented by an Australian, Aldo Vaca. And this is a handheld, in hand only, you're supposed to pump and you're developing the vacuum. And this is a two-hand technique. So the right hand is applying the traction and the left hand is, the thumb is on the cup and the right hand is on the head so that you're preventing the cup from popping off when you're giving traction. So the two-handed technique, then demonstrate. That is important in traction, your two-handed technique. Another technique important is perpendicular traction. A picture is correct. B picture, don't pull it oblique. So how do you know that? When you're pulling, your hand should not go beyond the circumference of the cup. So if the cup is there, your hand should not go like this. It should be at the circumference of the cup. Okay. So again, if you pull it in like how they're pulling it in B, it's going to pop off. Your vacuum is going to fail. So two things in traction: give support to the cup and pull it perpendicular. Otherwise, your cup is going to pop off. Now, this is a more flatter cup when compared to the cups which we are using. Okay, the Kiwi cup, which has been shown here, it's more flatter cup and it is more superior to our suction cups, the polyethylene cups which we are using, and less pop off is there. Okay, next slide. So some practical guides are: traction should be at right angle. Your traction should be synchronous with contraction. Only when there is good contraction you have to pull, because your traction is not much. You need support from the mother's contractions also. In between contractions, don't continue to pull, leave the traction. It should be made using one hand along the axis of the birth canal, follow the direction. When after 3 pulls you have not delivered, give up, do a cesarean section. And after head is delivered, before, just don't rip off the vacuum from the baby's head. You detach the suction tubing from the cup so that the vacuum gets released, and then you pull out your cup. Okay, next slide. Rules of vacuum: 2 cup detachments. Once your cup has detached, popped off, put it again. Second time it pops off, don't try vacuum again. 5 traction pulls. 5 times you can pull. During 5 contractions, if the baby is not delivered, so they wait for about 15 minutes since the starting of application of vacuum. Within 15 minutes of application of vacuum, your baby is not out, give up. Okay, go for a cesarean section. And advancement of fetal head. So with your first pull itself, you should feel the skull descending down. There is something called negative traction where the skull does not come down, but just the scalp is coming down. You're just pulling on the baby's scalp. So it's not really helping. It's called negative traction. So when that is happening, give up. Do not apply for premature infants. So with your first attempt itself, you should feel that little bit the skull has descended. If that is not happening, don't continue to use the vacuum. Next slide. So injuries, I told you, baby fetal injuries are more. Scalp abrasions, lumping of the scalp, sepal hematoma, which is subperiosteal hemorrhage, subepineuritic or subgaleal hemorrhage, intracranial hemorrhage, retinal hemorrhage, jaundice is more common with vacuum. Injuries are uncommon. That happens when you put your vacuum cup and part of the cervix or vagina has entered the cup. So after putting a vacuum, try to put a finger all around the circumference so that you feel that nothing has entered between, nothing is coming between the vacuum and the head. And again, sequentially use vacuum that feels you put forceps, that increases the risk of trauma. Next slide. So the first picture is showing you a caput succedaneum, which is nothing but the swelling in the layers of the scalp. Now the dark black line is the aponeurosis. So the picture C is subaponeurotic hemorrhage, which is much more dangerous and does not confine to the middle, it crosses the midline. About 250 ml of blood can collect in that space, and the baby can die. So C is very dangerous, which is below the black line, subaponeurotic. And B picture, C is dangerous. B is showing cephalhematoma, where it is below the white line. That is, the periosteum of the skull is just lifted up, and the swelling is between, the hemorrhage is between the periosteum and the skull. Cephalhematoma is less dangerous compared to a subaponeurotic hemorrhage. It does not cross the midline and will resolve. Okay, cephalhematoma. So this is all showing you which layer of the bleeding or swelling is present. Now, next slide. Okay, thank you. Can we go to the videos?
Yes, ma'am.
Mute the videos. So this is the Kiwi cup application. So first is to locate the flexion point. So you do a PV examination, you feel where is the posterior fontanelle, whether it is in the left occipito anterior, right occipito anterior, and so you know where exactly your cup should go. Your cup should go over the posterior fontanelle. So you're doing a PV examination, you're finding out the station. Now what he's doing is he's measuring the distance, how much his fingers have gone in. So his fingers have gone up to this fold, and we obstetricians know that it is different for every obstetrician. This is about 8 centimeters. So 8 centimeters your cup should go in. Okay, he's just measuring and seeing how much the cup should go in. So hold and insert the cup. So this Kiwi cup is easier to insert compared to the other because it is a flat cup. If it is a silicone cup, you're supposed to deflate it and like depress it and put in. Now with the left hand, you're depressing the perineum and creating space, and you're inserting the cup. Now where he was the posterior fontanelle, he is putting it over the posterior fontanelle, and on the tubing, there is centimeters. So it up to 8 centimeters, it has to go in. So this is an advantage of the Kiwi cup, which is not there in other devices. So you're depressing the perineum, making the smallest diameter go so that you're not causing discomfort. So rotate it to the side, put it inside, put it over the posterior fontanelle, as closer to the posterior fontanelle. Okay, and push it. And because he has previously measured up to 8 centimeters, it has to go. So you try to maneuver the cup. So after putting the cup and before you start your suction, try to feel that only 2 finger breaths should be between the rim of the cup and the anterior fontanelle. So that means you're over the flexion point. Okay, so that is important. So he has put the cup over the flexion point. So application is done, correct application over the flexion point. And after that, you put your finger in and go all around the circumference of the cup. And you see that cervix or vagina or anything is not coming between the vacuum cup and the baby's head. So you just go one round around the vacuum cup. And this is a check to say that otherwise, if something has got in between the cup and the baby's head, you will cause vaginal tear, cervical tear. So just put one hand around and see that nothing is coming in between the cup and the baby's head. So with the right hand, he's applying vacuum. The vacuum is being created and exclude maternal tissue. Now continue. So the vacuum is by hand pump here. So he's doing the sweep and nothing is there. So this is the 2-hand technique. Your left hand is on the cup and the right hand is going to create vacuum so that it doesn't pop off. So the 2-hand technique should be followed. Okay, posteriorly nothing will be there. Only the anterior vagina usually gets involved in the between the cup and the fetal head. Okay. Okay, so this is the 2-hand technique. The left hand is over the cup and preventing it from popping off. And the right hand is going to be giving traction. So see the direction of traction. It is downwards and backwards because it is low. The baby's head is high. Can you see the baby's head coming out? When you see the baby's head at the perineum, your traction is horizontal. Once the subocciput has come under the pubic symphysis, you're going to deliver a baby by extension. So your pull is upwards. So downwards and backwards, crowning horizontal And when it's fully crowning, you will take it upwards, and this is how you deliver the baby's head by extension. So this is the correct application of the flexion point. Yeah, forceps delivery. So in India, where we have a lot of patients, they directly, so PGs learn on the patients, but clinically you are supposed to learn on a dummy pelvis and maternal dummy, and improve your skills before actually in USA and UK, they let you try it on a live patient. Okay. So the check for forceps is matching pair. Sometimes there'll be many forceps lying and you just pick up 2 forceps. They might be part of 2 other different forceps. You lock it and you see that it is the correct forceps, the match for that forceps. In forceps, always do abdominal examination before vaginal examination. If you can feel the head abandoned, don't try a forceps delivery. Only if less than 1/5 of the head is palpable. Do a PV examination, confirm cervix is dilated, LOA and ruptured membranes, and know the position where is the occiput. Tell the mother what is happening. Empty the bladder. If there is a catheter, deflate the balloon. Always you should have a pediatrician and a backup anesthetist. Everybody should be involved. Okay. So to see all your checks and prerequisites are complete. Okay, so this is the forceps, the handle. Above that is the shank, which are 2 separated things. The lock is in between the handle and the shank. And then you have the blade, the fenestrated blade. So the cephalic curve is the part of which is going to hold the head. And the pelvic curve is the upward curve on the forceps. Okay, so these are the parts of the forceps. This is the pelvic curve, which you see going upwards. So the concave part of the curve should be up. Okay, Keyland's forceps. It is a slightly different forceps. You will see that the shanks are overlapping. Okay, so this forceps is going to be kept for you, the low forceps or the Wrigley's forceps. So this is how you hold the forceps, a light grip on the hand. Okay. So 4 fingers are going to come between the blade and the vagina. The blade is not going to be directly in contact with the vagina, and the thumb is gently guiding the blade of the forceps into. So you start from like vertical direction and then go horizontal when you're applying forceps. So this is applied on the left side of the maternal abdomen. So this is the left blade, which is the first blade which is applied. You leave it, it is hanging on the perineum. Now the same way, the right blade is applied. The right hand is holding the handle. So the left blade, the left hand is holding the handle, locking done. Okay. So while locking, both the handles should meet. Okay. Now they're slightly separated, both hands should meet. Hold blade horizontal. Again, the direction of curve is. Now this is a maneuver they use to depress the forceps so that you're going to pull the forceps in the direction of curve of Caris. Okay. So your right hand is pulling it horizontally, the other hand is pushing it downwards. So downwards and backwards for low forceps. So that is the direction of pull that you want. Okay. So press down with your left hand, right hand is pulling downwards and backwards. Now it is horizontally, it has reached the perineum. Once it reaches the perineum, you have to pull it upwards. So now here, when it is crowning over the perineum, they are giving an episiotomy. Okay, they didn't give it before. So they gave an episiotomy, another person is giving perineal support. So after episiotomy, pull it upwards. Okay, once it is crowning, when you pull it horizontally, that's when you give an episiotomy, then you pull it upwards. So your direction of pull is same as in vacuum. Okay. So we didn't finish very early. We took a lot of time. Any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
How can we assess the correct cup size for vacuum delivery? Okay. So you should use the biggest size available. So usually it will be 6 centimeters. Okay. 6 centimeters cup is if it is a deflexed head, even higher, but 6 centimeters is the maximum. If it is a slightly smaller baby like an Ayujar baby, then you can go for 4 centimeters. You will know the baby's weight from before. So you are anticipating a smaller baby, you can go for 4 to 5 centimeters. But for an average size baby, always go with a 6 centimeter cup. is Chinon seen as caput succedaneum? Caput succedaneum is caused by, the cause of caput succedaneum is because of impeded venous return. The baby's head is stuck in the pelvis for long, and below the level of this unsupported part of the head, there is no venous drainage happening. So that is why there is fluid collecting. The Chinon is same. There is where the fluid collecting is in the layers of the scalp. But why is the Chinon formed? It is because of your suction. So the cause of Chinon is your suction. Cause of caput is the head getting stuck at the girdle of contact and impeded venous return. Is Chinon seen with every vacuum delivery? The soft cups will not cause Chinon because they don't need that knob to create. It is more seen in metal cups. Okay. And station again. Yeah, I explained station. So at the level of the ischial spines is 0 station. And so if you feel you should go to the pelvis and you feel the prominence, like a bony prominence there, that is the ischial spine. So come to the center and feel where the head is. If you cannot feel the head, means it is above the level of ischial spine, is minus station. If you feel the head exactly at the level of ischial spine, it is 0 station. If it is ischial spine is here and it is 1 centimeter below, +1, +2, +3, +4, +5, +5, you can see the baby's head in the perineum. If ischial spine is here and you come to the center and you don't feel the head, you try going up. If it is going 1 centimeter above, it is -1, 2 centimeter above, it is -2, -3, -4, -5, it is in the pelvic brim. So this is the level of the ischial spine, -5, -4, -3, -2, -1, 0 station. +1, +2, +3, +4, +5 is the level of the head. Any other questions, Rohan?
Yes, ma'am. There is a question if there is any advantage of forceps delivery over cesarean delivery.
Yeah, I answered that, I think. Yeah, vaginal delivery is definitely better for the patient for morbidity, less complications. Cesarean section, again, there is risk of bladder injury, there is risk of anesthesia complications, spinal anesthesia, general anesthesia, more additions. Then again, next time she might need a repeat cesarean. So for the patient, vaginal delivery has definite advantages over a cesarean. So forceps, if you can give a safe forceps delivery with a safe mother and a safe baby, go for forceps over cesarean section.
Yes. And we have one more question. If you can explain cephalic and pelvic application.
Okay.
Cephalic and pelvic application.
If you apply the forceps in a way that the forceps blade, the sagittal suture is coming exactly in the center of the forceps blade, it is called a cephalic application. Okay. So in occipito anterior position, your forceps blade is going like this. So the sagittal suture is in between your two blades. That is cephalic application. Okay. If your left occipital anterior and your sagittal suture is like this, and if you apply forceps like this, your sagittal suture is going to be oblique and your forceps application is going to be like this. That is not cephalic application. Your sagittal suture is not parallel to your forceps blade. So if you apply like this and your sagittal suture is parallel to your forceps blade, that is cephalic application. But if your sagittal suture is like this and you apply, you don't care how it is, and you simply apply your forceps like this, it is not cephalic application, it is pelvic. Pelvic application is always left blade is like this and right blade is like this and you pull. Irrespective of where the sagittal suture is, you are always going to put forceps like this and pull. That is pelvic. But depending upon where the sagittal suture is, you do a PV and you find out where the sagittal suture is and put your blade parallel to that, left occipital anterior, right? You put your blades like this and then you pull. That is called cephalic application. You should always aim for cephalic application to prevent fetal injuries.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we are done with the questions, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, ma'am. It was a very interesting and wonderful session on instrumental
Thanks,
delivery.
Thank you.